This is ogforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered, independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention three things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Paya. Paya offers Acumatica users a suite of industry-leading payment orchestration tools. Far beyond native Acumatica payments, Paya enables EMV NFC terminals for countersale. They offer a frictionless customer portal through their click-to-pay solution, and they support most e-commerce platforms and point-of-sale solutions used with Acumatica, such as One Retail and AcuPOS. And best of all, omni-channel reconciliation is available for all their solutions. Our second sponsor is DataSelf. DataSelf Analytics is a revolutionary reporting solution that enables organizations to make the most informed decisions faster and easier than ever. It uniquely simplifies business intelligence, empowers anyone to build and access dashboards, and delivers critical business insight when and where you need it. Our third sponsor is Aldrich Web Solutions. Are you a distributor using Acumatica, yet struggling with an e-commerce fit? US-based Aldrich Web Solutions out of Marion, Illinois, has 2 decades of experience helping distributors find success online. Our team of experts built the integration, creating websites that work effortlessly with Acumatica. With our reputation for swift customer service and meticulous attention to detail, we are the perfect fit for distributors needing online solutions. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. The second thing I'd like to mention is that I'm always looking for victims. I mean guests. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn more about being a guest on the podcast. Third and finally, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out augforums.com/Rolodex to find out who else is using Acumatica and read the instructions at the top to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Friday, December 1st, 2023, and this is episode number 116. You can find related links on the episode page at augforums.com/episode 116. Today we're talking with Clint McRee about SourceDay. SourceDay is an Acumatica ISV partner that I know very little about, but I see them do a lot of marketing, and I've heard good things about them. Nothing more than, hey, it's a good product. And so, as usual, I like using this podcast to learn about new things, and so that's what I'm going to do here. Hey, Clint, thanks for coming on today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me here, Tim. And yeah, I would love to get you educated on everything that SourceDay is about and how we're adding value to Acumatica customers.
And you'll find that I am heavy on technical deep dive, just my mindset, and light on marketing fluff. So I'll probe and, ask questions wherever I can. And if you're like, I don't know the answer, no problem. I know I'm not talking to like the engineer here. At least I don't think I am.
No,
Um,
definitely not. I'm gonna be more. I'll be more sales and marketing, unfortunately for you, but I'll try to keep it as technical as possible, I guess.
Sounds good. We'll see how it goes. Well, hey, before we get into SourceDay, I always like finding out the brief origin story of all of our guests. Maybe you could tell us where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you got into the world of mid-market ERP.
Yeah, so I grew up in Houston. My dad was in the oil and gas industry. He's retired now, and my my mom, she ran an insurance business in Houston. After graduating from University of Houston, I actually went to work for a very close friend that had a manufacturing business, and they weren't an Acumatica customer. This was before Acumatica was even around, but they had a manufacturing business and running an ERP, and over the years I just got more and more involved in that business. I started off in sales, and then moved into helping run the company, run production. So I got super intimate, deep dive knowledge into ERP and running MRP and all the sort of bells and whistles that we all have to deal with on a daily basis to run those companies. And it was that experience actually of being involved in, well, I'm sure we'll dive into that here more in a minute, but it was that experience of running that company is what led me to start SourceDay.
That's interesting that you started in sales and got into operations. Like I could be wrong, but I feel like 80% of the time it's the other way around. Like if someone wants to, I don't know, it seems like most people who start in sales do not go into operations. Maybe I'm wrong on that. What's your gut feel?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I've always just had a taste for wanting to learn just everything. I've just try to get involved in as many things as I can. I enjoy sales. I still, even today, I mean, I get involved in the sales. I'm not closing my own deals per se, but certainly in the you can get involved in deals to help our salespeople close them. But yeah, I think it's probably a unique path to go from sales to operations. But that's my nature. So.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense that you would wind up at an ISV software company because it just seems like people who really like knowing the guts of how things work wind up getting into business software because that's really at the end of the day what's making it work or not work, or the gear, the levers you have to tweak to make it work better. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember, Tim, like when I was running the company, at one point we were trying to get a lot more efficient. We brought in some uh, consultants to help us do like Kaizen events, and we started getting really unlocking more feature functionality and doing backflushing and just in time. And when we started doing that, of course, you just start to get all over the ERP. One transaction here creates 15 transactions there, and so yeah, it was a lot of fun to learn that, and I think it was that knowledge of really getting a deep dive in what ERP is all about that's helped me do what we're doing at SourceDay.
So I intentionally do not do research beforehand. I like coming in completely green and just going with the flow of the conversation. Before we get to what source day is, uh, tell me. I don't even I don't even know what your title is there. Give me your title and like how long have you been at Source Day?
It's fine. I'm actually one of the co-founders of the company, so I'm one of the my title right now is Chief Strategy Officer, but I literally have been everything, right? I mean, when you start as a co-founder of and starting a business from day one, you do a little bit of everything.
So that makes sense. I mean, it seemed like you were going in that direction, talking about working for a manufacturer, and it sounded like you were. It was starting to sound to me like you uncovered a problem that you didn't have a software solution for, and so it makes sense that you're the co-founder of a software company to solve a pain that you were experiencing at a
It,
customer site.
you got it. You nailed it exactly.
Now, you did mention manufacturing. Is that kind of your industry focus, or is SourceDay just all over the place in terms of industries?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we focus mostly on like discrete manufacturing, but I pulled short of just saying manufacturing because it's really manufacturing, but it's also like discrete assembly. What I did at Cypress, which is cyber technologies where I worked, where I learned this craft. We were an electronic shop, so we built cable and harnesses, printed circuit boards, box assemblies, and so we weren't, fabricating raw goods. We were taking components and assembling them. So discrete assembly, discrete manufacturing is definitely our sweet spot at SourceDay.
Okay. So yeah, we're almost 7 minutes in, and all right, now I always like spending an uncomfortable amount of time, dancing around the topic, but especially for an ISV. All right, go ahead, give it to me. Give me your pitch. What is SourceDay, and where do you add value?
Well, I'll try to keep it, short and sweet for you and your audience. We are think of us as like short and sweet. Like think of us as like a supplier vendor portal. Um, but that's really kind of the only comparison that I would make. The rest of it is very unique. I mean, we provide we provide a way for customers of Acumatica to be able to collaborate with their suppliers, regardless of how the suppliers want to collaborate. So, if suppliers want to accept POs and emails, or if they want to use a portal, or if they want to use EDI, our application allows an Acumatica customer to do that very thing. And what is really sweet about it is that even if you let's say you're dealing with 100 suppliers and each supplier has a different way they want to collaborate, we consolidate that experience for like an Acumatica buyer, like if there's a buyer, someone in procurement, into one single experience. So one of the big complaints we always hear is a buyer says, well, some suppliers I have to do this email, some suppliers I have to call them, some suppliers I have to use EDI. And so they're using all these different processes to manage their supply chain, where we consolidate that down into a unified experience for them. And then the last thing I'll say to that is what we see every day, and this might surprise your audience to know this, is that in the land of supply chain and the land of procurement, uh, there's there's constant change. Purchase orders are constantly changing, and for those that are running MRP, and it's important that materials show up on time because you're trying to run a factory and you're trying to hit your deadlines and make your customer commitments. It makes it very difficult because all those POs are changing. The buyers are making changes, the suppliers are making changes. When you miscellaneous issue and delete inventory out of your system, that creates changes that you have to get out to the POs. So all that change is a lot of work for customers to keep track of externally in emails and spreadsheets. So we give them a solution that helps them manage all that change and then move all that information back into Acumatica. So that way Acumatica has the latest due dates, the latest pricing, the latest quantity, which of course helps other parts of the business, from running your production schedules to processing an invoice from the suppliers. So it's all tied together. I probably lost you there, but hopefully that made sense.
No, I got you. And actually, I lied earlier when I said I know nothing about SourceDay. The only thing I did know was someone came to me at Acumatica Summit and said, "Oh, I just had gone by the SourceDay booth and they're doing something really cool." And that's what stood out to them. It was the after the PO is placed part of it. And I had felt that pain myself before, specifically around the promise dates. And so it did sound interesting to me. But before we get to that, maybe help me out where I'm still a little bit further back, wanting to understand the initial placing of the PO. So you talked about consolidating all the different ways vendors want to communicate. Great, let's get to that. But back up for a second. From a buyer standpoint, do they essentially live in SourceDay even when they're going to place that initial PO?
Yeah, a great question. So no, so they're still going to leverage Acumatica to create the purchase order and release the purchase order. We pick up where once the purchase order is ready to be delivered to the supplier, that's when we pick that PO up through the integration and deliver it to the supplier. So we believe that it makes that our model has always been that the ERP needs to own the PO, own the receipt, because that's the ERP needs to see that information in order to be able to effectively run. So it's inside the ERP.
So they start off in Acumatica, they create their purchase order, and it sounds to me like instead of clicking the print button, I am printing to SourceDay. My mechanism for delivering it to the vendor is not print, export to PDF, attach to email. It's another button that's send it via SourceDay, essentially.
Yeah, I'm not. I am not. I'm not gonna. I'll fall in the knife here and say I don't know Acumatica enough to say that how you release a PO. But essentially, once the PO becomes in a released or ready for to deliver to the suppliers, when we would pick it up, whether that's printing it still or not. But a lot of times when some of the ERPs, when you click print, that's when it'll officially release it, and that's when we pick it up. So it becomes like an ordered status versus like a draft status.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there are different options in Acumatica. I'm thinking of it in my brain as print, but yeah, it sounds like it's delivered to vendor. And so, all right, so you do that. It then delivers it to the vendor. So somehow it sends. You mentioned pricing even, so it must not just send over who the vendor is to SourceDay. It must send over all the individual items, quantities, prices, and all that stuff, right?
Exactly. So it's just think of it as like a digital purchase order. And when a supplier gets a notification, so they'll get a notification that they have a new PO. And when they go to access that PO, however they're going to do it, again, they can do it in email directly or they can do it in our portal. When they go to access that, they're going to see the PO with all its line items, and the supplier has the ability to acknowledge a PO. Now, this is an interesting concept. It's a very basic concept, but the vast majority of the customers that we talk to have a manual purchase order acknowledgement process. But it's a very critical step in their business, because if a PO is not acknowledged and the parts don't show up and the PO is lost, that can be very detrimental to your schedules and to your customers. So the very first thing that a supplier can do is they can acknowledge a PO. So we make sure every PO is delivered and every PO is acknowledged. And if a purchase order is not acknowledged, then a buyer can very easily identify which ones are not acknowledged and address those as an exception basis. But in addition to that, the supplier has the ability to look at the price that's being offered on the line, or the price on the line item, the quantities that are going to be on the line item, and the dates. The supplier, upon reviewing that, can suggest and save changes. So let's say you want something delivered by January 1. Supplier might come back and say, can't do January 1, I can do February 1. So they can save that suggested change. And when they save it, that change will go back to the buyer via the SourceDay application, where the buyer can review that change. And if the buyer accepts the change in SourceDay, SourceDay will overwrite the due date in Acumatica automatically through our integration. And you can do that line by line, or you can do that kind of thing in bulk. So you can think about a buyer just spending their entire day going back and forth trying to uh, get on top of their purchase orders and make sure they're all accurate. We give them very quick triggers to be able to do a lot of things in bulk. That's the basic concept, Tim.
That makes sense, especially if I'm in the portal. But before we get to the portal, give me the different ways that a vendor might get a PO. So you mentioned, I would assume that they could get an automatic email from your system. I would assume you also mentioned EDI, which I didn't know. That's interesting.
Mhm.
Um, what else? Can they get like a robot delivering a phone call to them, a text message? Like, what's all the ways they can get notified?
That's the that is the three ways primarily that checks the boxes. Like, we don't fax a PO, for example, but yeah, so they can a supplier can interact with a PO directly in an email with SourceDay. The supplier can interact with a PO in our portal, so they can log into the portal, which unlocks a ton of other things that information and that suppliers have access to. We can talk about that later. And then EDI. Now, EDI, is like, we had a customer yesterday that asked about CXML, and so yes, we can do that. So they're not doing specifically EDI, but we'll be able to support their needs through CXML. So that's the primary ways that we support and communicate back and forth with suppliers.
We'll get to the portal, I promise. On EDI, uh, do you handle all the EDI yourself, or do you have a partner on that?
We have a partner that we leverage for that. We'll actually be making an announcement in Q1 about who that partner is, but for right now, I have to keep that under wraps. But yes, we have a partner that helps us with the EDI. Now, the EDI, just so you know, does actually flow through the portal for the buyer. So the buyer still is able to use the portal to interact and deal with and manage and see their EDI orders.
I like that. Then tell me about email. So I'm picturing it, the portal to me is easier, right? Because once you get someone into your application, then you can do whatever you want. But let's say you have someone who just wants to deal with email. Um, I I really like a support application called Zendesk,
Hmm.
um, which basically just for a lot of people just handles the email communication better and ties it to tickets, right? And it seems simple, but like executing it is not so simple because it's like I got to be able to dissect the email and automate stuff. Are you doing anything via email where, let's say, they can get the PO in an email format and they can see, all right, it's got 10 lines on it, here's the quantities, etc. And can they easily like click links in the email and have it update dates? Or like, is there anything they can send back in a structured format in just the email without having to log into the portal?
Yeah, yeah, that's you got it. That's exactly how we've developed it to work is that you can get now. I mean, so first of all, one of the things I'll just say about the email, besides the experience of managing the PO, um, in sales, you asked earlier about my transition from sales to operations, but in sales, we've had tools for years that when we're prospecting with customers, we can tell if a customer prospect opens an email, if they clicked on a link, if they forwarded it, like that. That technology exists, but that technology has not really been available for procurement people. So one of the first things when you think about, probably our most important value prop is making sure that all the POs are delivered, and so we can tell even in an email if the supplier has received the PO, if they've opened the PO, if they've clicked on the PO, and if they haven't, then we are able to give visual indicators to a buyer that says, hey, this PO might be at risk because there's been no interaction with it whatsoever. And so you might want to pick up a phone and call that supplier and ask them to to give to make sure they get some eyes on it. So that's kind of first and foremost a very critical thing. So all that's for any PO that we pick up through Acumatica, we can deliver that experience to. Specifically on a PO that gets delivered via email, though, you're exactly right. It's we link an email to a PO, and so when they open up, they can have a digital experience with that PO where they can make changes to dates and quantities and things like that, and then send them back, and then we capture those changes for the buyer to be able to review and accept. So that
Can
way,
they
that
do that? So like
good.
the PO part would make sense to me. I would assume you'd have a link in there that's like approved PO and they don't even have to log into the portal. It's just
Exactly.
some type of like special link that knows that PO got approved. That I would assume that's true.
Yep.
What
Exactly.
about like updating a date? Like if they are there links all over the place where they could like click on a date and suggest a new date without logging into the portal?
Well, I'm going to butcher this, but I would relate it to like a punch out type experience. Like you can click into the so yes, in the email itself, you can approve the PO, accept the PO. You can also open the PO in sort of like a punch out experience where then you can interact with the PO itself without having to log into SourceDay itself.
That is really cool. So the punch out's really cool. And to me, the what is very basic from a technology standpoint, but is still huge and probably your biggest value prop, in my opinion, is just the fact that you're using email marketing technology that has been around for a long time and applying it, like you said, to procurement people who haven't had it. And those basic things like did the email get there? Did it get approved? Like that's stuff that marketers have been doing for years and years and
Hmm.
years. Like that stuff, if it could just be applied to other areas of the business, I've like wondered this for years. Why isn't anyone else applying this? And it sounds like you guys are, and that's really cool. I love stuff like this because the world loves talking about the latest technology, AI or whatever, but there is so much stuff, in my opinion, that's like just been sitting by the roadside that you could apply old technology to that just hasn't been done yet. And I love these solutions that it's the use case that's cool, right? It's not the technology itself because this technology has been around for a while.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it, Tim. I mean, one of the interesting things about the world that we're in, which we're on the supply side or buy side of businesses, and um, there just really hasn't been a lot of technology put into those areas. I'd say 9 times out of 10, when we're talking to a company, they're using the same technology in procurement that they've used for 20 or 30 years. And that technology is an email, that technology is a spreadsheet. that and they really, you're right, there's so much technology on in other parts of the business, including the sales and marketing side, that is very relevant and helpful for these procurement team. I mean, they really live and die by what happens with their purchase orders. And to not have, when I it's really, this is interesting. And my head of sales, head of marketing, Sarah, always um, goes crazy when I say this, but I use a Venmo example, Tim. Like, whenever I'm speaking in public, the first thing I ask is who's here has used Venmo or Apple Pay, and everybody says, yeah. I said, isn't this a great technology that, we can take our phones and I can send money to you, Tim, and I know you got it, and you can request it, so we both know exactly what's going on with the transaction. But for the vast majority of manufacturing companies and procurement professionals, they're going to send millions of dollars worth of purchase orders every year and do not have the technology to give them the status of those purchase orders without having to pick up the phone and ask.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And I think earlier that's why I s- I say it as it's just the print button because I'm thinking of the old school, right? I mean, I know there's EDI, et cetera, but like I think a lot of people are just printing it to PDF and emailing it.
They
I don't know
are.
if anyone's physically mailing it anymore. They might be, but I like thinking in that mindset. And it seems like you can deliver that. I get the punch out experience. I still want to stay on email a little bit more before we get to the
Yeah,
portal, but
sure.
um, the the punch out, that's really cool. I could do that without logging in. What if you've got the older person on the other end receiving that PO and they're just like, oh, they just hit reply and start typing. I don't think we can get it by what are we in December now? December 15th. That it would probably be like January 5th. That they just type that sentence. What happens? Like I hope actually you don't have like some AI that automatically interprets that. But tell me what happens. Does that at least capture the email in your system so someone can read it? How does that work?
Yeah, yeah, it would be where someone would have to read it, capture it, and act upon it. Um, and then we understand that that's still going to happen. So we made sure that we capture that experience. But we prefer the supplier to use the digital approach just because that allows us to capture those specific data points, and then we can update. It just makes it much easier for everybody involved.
But if they do reply, I still think this is cool because what I would assume would happen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that you know which PO they responded to.
Exactly. Yes.
And so
Hmm.
now you feel like a Zendesk to me, and that what I like about Zendesk is someone replies to that ticket, and that ticket is now it can change status. It can go back to open instead of waiting on customer response or something like that. I would assume that you got a similar concept there where they reply to that PO, and at least it's now sitting in a queue for someone to look at.
Yeah, exactly. Everything that we do, all the communication, email or portal or otherwise, is done at the PO, actually PO line level. So it's not even just the PO itself; it's actually the line. So we take them right to the exact line that there's a question or a concern or a comment about.
And interesting. How would you know the line? So here's where I like to get technical. Now, I'm not getting like technology technical. I'm getting like functional technical, right? So like they get the email that says you've got a new PO and it's got 15 lines on it, and they just reply to that email. How would you know which line they're talking about?
That in that case we wouldn't. But if
Okay,
they use the digital experience and they update a line, we would know specifically, right, which line that's obviously
gotcha.
tied to. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, so you've got like it's almost like it's not a status, it's like a communication status at both the header level and the line level. It's like, where's this PO and this line level at from a communication standpoint? Is it delivered? Is it accepted? Has it been responded to? Is that a good way of describing it?
Yeah, exactly. And the reason why the lines are important is that, regardless of how we interact and whatever protocol we use to communicate with suppliers or the suppliers communicate with our procurement professionals, every line is really kind of like a separate contract. I mean, you could have a PO with 10 line items on it and 9 of the lines are good and the 10th item is bad. So we never want to, hold purchase order up the entire purchase order up for one line item. So we want those suppliers to acknowledge those 9, so we're good there, and then we can work that 10th one separately. So that's why we do that. A lot of folks are, of course, very accustomed to working with an entire PO, and it's either all or nothing in terms of going back and forth with acknowledgement. But we allow to do that at the line level, just so that you can check the box, so to speak.
I love the way you phrase that, that every line is a separate contract. That is so true. Yeah,
Hmm.
it drives me nuts when you hear a buyer talk about just at the PO level, and they're talking about, oh, they came back with a different date, and they're just not even thinking about the line level. And it's like, yeah, I like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, this might be too much into the because I'm sure you integrate with multiple ERPs, right?
We do. Hmm.
So this is probably going to be too technical, but I'll ask it anyways. So like in Acumatica, you got a PO status, and you're right. It's not just the print. There's other ways you could do it. You could have an approval process, etc. But it's going to let you receive it once the PO is open. Do you
Correct.
know if you've enabled anything specifically in Acumatica to enable, let's say, the 14 lines on the PO for receiving, but not the one line that has an updated date on it or something like that?
So I'll answer that how we've done. I don't know specifically about Acumatica, but we have had customers, and we have implemented to where when a supplier acknowledges a PO, for example, or a line, that we go to the line in the ERP and confirm it or acknowledge it in the ERP, and then customers will tell you that they'll use that as a way to authorize the receipt.
So I would, yeah, not, we don't need to get too much into the nitty gritty, but I would assume that yeah, it sounds like you could customize something in Acumatica to give you that additional field that you need to say approved or not. And then you could have Acumatica's functionality look at that.
Yeah, we would definitely want to leverage whatever Acumatica has there. It's not something that we would, want to go build on our own. But if there's triggers that are there that are available that we could trigger through our integration, that's something that we've done before.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it sounds like you're willing to step into the tech when you need to. It sounds like that's just your mindset. That's how you got to this point. You like getting into the details, and it sounds like you wouldn't shy away from even working with another customization partner on the Acumatica side of it if needed to make that workflow better for a customer.
Yeah, we have done that. I mean, again, it's not a requirement we see very often, but from time to time we'll see that kind of requirement. And then depending on the lift, how hard is it to actually get it to do that? Is it something that is pretty straightforward and we can do with very little effort, or do we need to do a statement of work or something like that to actually create that functionality? So just something that we would
Very,
vet through the selling process.
very cool. Yeah, but it sounds like you have the chops to do it. I think a lot of ISVs are marketing heavy and tech not heavy. It sounds like, I don't know, just the way you're describing your solution, it sounds like you've got the technical chops to deliver things at a technical level. You don't just have a what you
Oh
see is
yeah.
what you get type of a product.
Oh yeah, I mean we when we integrate to an ERP, it's a full blown integration. I mean we integrate into the PO, like the PO tables, we vendor tables, we integrate into the accounting invoice tables, receiving tables. So we're just pretty involved and intimate with these ERPs. So yeah, we've got lots of capabilities around being able to support various you know functions.
So I love what I've heard so far. I mean, again, basic stuff from a technology standpoint, but the
Yeah.
use case is just so great. Like, yeah, managing the communication is huge, and just knowing what you still need to follow up on. And I would assume one thing I want to ask you, you mentioned earlier, like, if the suppliers even open the PO. And you mentioned, you could let someone know they need to maybe make a phone call. Do you have also a way, I'm thinking email marketing wise, to follow up automatically with an email like 5 days later if they haven't opened it? Do you have any type of marketing automation
Yeah,
capabilities?
yeah, that's actually the original premise of SourceDay was to sort of manage the PO lifecycle. And so part of a buyer's day, like if you remove the SourceDay piece of it, part of the buyer's day every day is to buy parts, but also follow up with suppliers. It might be following up on PO acknowledgments, it might be following up on deliveries, it might be expediting. So that entire um, concept of managing all that is automated in SourceDay. So yes, you can have SourceDay follow up on an unacknowledged PO. You can have SourceDay follow up on a PO that's due in 7 days. You can have SourceDay follow up on a PO that's past due. All that can be automated triggers set up inside SourceDay that will email the supplier.
Interesting. So, I mean, that piece right there is that's a lot of work. Like I know just from looking at email marketing solutions, there's a big difference between a solution that can deliver the email and tell you if someone's clicked on it, your open rates, etc. That's one thing. It's an entirely different thing to give someone a true marketing automation engine, which is like a workflow. If this happens, then this happens. Otherwise, this happens. It's almost like a graphical programming type of a tool. So, like, I'm using MailChimp, and you can get really savvy with how you set that up. And I think it's a real skill to even set that up. It's one thing. So yeah, I'm all over the place. So to me, it's one thing to have like, I can deliver email. It's another thing to have a solution that gives you the ability to build automations. And then it's a whole nother thing to know how to set those automations up.
Yeah.
Um, are you saying that you have your own automation engine, or are you partnering with an email marketing company on the back end for that?
Yeah, no, it's all SourceDay. We really don't consider ourselves like an email marketing or leverage anything like that. I mean, day one, we built the product to I hate to use the word babysit, but essentially babysit the purchase orders, because so this is the thing, right? Once a purchase order is cut, Tim, in the ERP is sort of dumb to what's actually happening with that PO outside of the ERP. Meaning that if I cut a PO for something and I need it delivered in 5 days, the ERP once you issue the PO, it thinks that's actually going to happen. It thinks it's going to be delivered in
Right.
5 days, right? It doesn't know the supplier's on vacation. It doesn't know the supplier, we can't get a hold of the supplier, or the PO got lost in the spam folder, right? It doesn't know any of those things are happening. And so what we believe is that we need to get these important critical uh, um, POs out of the buyer's, emails where they've got emails from their uncle and emails from their boss, and into an application where they can manage it so they know that nothing's going to fall through the cracks, including making sure POs get it confirmed and so we built all that automation into the application essentially day one because we knew that was, consumed a lot of the buyer's day, and it was very critical steps because if those parts don't come in on time, then it can be very disruptive to the business.
So I will still promise that we'll get to your portal, but I don't know. We might only have a few minutes at the end. I'm really excited about the email piece because I just feel like that's the reality for most people. Yeah, if you can get someone to log into your portal, great. Your punch out, I'm already sold on the punch out thing. Like just the fact that you can punch out and not actually log in is huge. But I'm still stuck on the email. Sorry. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm thinking like an email marketing engine here. So it sounds like you can deliver the PO. If they don't open it in 5 days, you could have a rule set up to say, send them a follow up email. Sounds like you can do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, getting into the kind of the specifics of it, our automation would be more along the lines of we would send an email to, show them they have a new PO. If the PO hasn't been acknowledged in 5 days, SourceDay would send them another email. So it's not based off of if they haven't responded to the email. It's more based off of what's the status of the PO.
Okay, okay. So yeah, I maybe getting a little too excited. Like I know building those email marketing engines is complicated work. So I wouldn't think you would have a full blown like MailChimp type of a
No.
an
No, yeah,
automation
that's
engine,
not.
but
Yeah, it's not what it is. It does similar things, but it's definitely it's all based off of the status of the PO.
gotcha. So, is it the PO or could you also do the line level? Because I got
The
2
lines,
scenarios
the
I'm
lines. I'm
thinking.
sorry, it's the
You
lines.
could,
It's the
okay.
lines. Yes.
So could I'll just throw out a few scenarios that, I get I probably can't graphically create this, but you might already have it built. So it sounds like you could follow up in 5 days if it hasn't been acknowledged. Could you also then email that person's boss if it hasn't been acknowledged in 10 days, something like that?
Let me think about that. I possibly. I mean, so the we have the ability to have multiple users, on the supplier side. So it could be, somebody at the supplier's office. They can have as many people as they want. So all of those, you could have all of those folks be on an email. Um, but we don't. I don't believe we have a rule that says if this person hasn't responded, then email this person. It's sort of all
Gotcha.
or nothing. Yeah.
Okay. At least not at this point. Maybe you could build that
Yeah.
in, right? Like
Yeah.
like you
Exactly.
mentioned, they're out of the office, right? Especially like summertime, someone's out for 2-week vacation or whatever, and you might want to hit the next person on the list if you're not hearing back. And I get that it's not full blown email marketing engine where you would read the auto response. You're doing it based off the status, but that'd still be good enough. You'd be like, I haven't heard a status. Let me try another person. Maybe in the future you'd have that. Um, what about back on the line level? What about dates? So this is one where I've tried to do reporting on this multiple times at different companies because they want to know the information. The problem is they can't get people to update the POs fast enough. You know this information. So this is something you could do. Like how many I'm laughing because I feel like it happens all the time. How many times do you have a promise date on a PO line, right? Where it's in the past. And
Yeah.
obviously it's not right anymore because you haven't received it yet. Can
Yeah.
you do some emailing there where like, hey, this is past due, or hey, it's coming up tomorrow and is this still going to happen? You could do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's core functionality for us. So, first and foremost, people have late parts all the time, late POs, and so one of the things that happens in the real world is we don't find out something is late until we need it. Right? We're on the factory floor. We're trying to put something together, and the part's not there. Then we call the supplier, and then we start triaging that issue. What SourceDay does is like the stroke of midnight. As soon as the part is late, we see it as late, SourceDay will auto trigger notifications to go to the supplier to get an updated status as to what's going on with the PO. Then, so that's built in. The other thing is we
Wait, can I
also have.
follow up on that?
Yep.
Can
Yep.
can you put buffers in there? So depending on, the specific situation, some people might be like, "Hey, stroke of midnight is too late. I want to give them a heads up. Hey, is this still coming tomorrow?" Can you do something like that?
Well, again, these are automated notifications, so it would be when it goes when we see that it's late, the automated email would go out and say your part is late. Can you either reply back or log into the portal and tell us the updated date so that we can update our system? That's basically how that works.
Gotcha. So it is more reactive. Maybe in the future you'd have more of a proactive because yeah, it depends on the vendor too, right? It's almost like in a perfect world, you'd be able to turn this on for specific vendors where you're like, hey, you said this is going to be here in 2 days. Is that still the case? Or where it's a little beforehand, but it sounds like right now it's more stroke of midnight when it happens, which is still
Yeah,
great.
I mean, we look at the late part as a pretty critical thing. So that's something that's sort of automated across the board. But when you're talking about specific suppliers or specific vendors, we do have that by vendor, by supplier on what we call the radar. And that's the second part of your question was, hey, can I send out a reminder to my supplier that something is coming near its due date? And so that's exactly what that's for. And so let's say you've got a supplier, in another town, across town, you might want to remind them a couple of days before the due date that it's due. But then you might have like a supplier in China, and you might want to give them a 3 or 4 week notice that something is due. So you can dial that part of it by supplier and have a different setting by supplier.
Okay. And then it sounds like you're talking about more than a dashboard in your application where you'd have like a red, yellow, green, like red is these are late, yellow these are maybe going to be late, and green these are on time, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would, yeah, we have, views, in the application. So a buyer can log into SourceDay and they could say, just like you said, these are all my PO lines that are near their due date. These are all my PO lines that are past due. These are all my PO lines that have not been acknowledged and confirmed.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean that's huge. So like, yeah, that date management, and that was actually what the person who had told me about your solution was most excited about. It was the date management side of it because that's such a huge pain point. And, going back to the reporting part of it, like what I've tried to do from a reporting standpoint before, but the data just wasn't there. Was all right, like vendor scorecard type of things, right? We want to know how often dates are slipping and by how much, right? Well, you have to first be capturing the data to do that. It's pretty simple reporting, but capturing the data, that's what you're doing. And that's a big deal to actually have those dates be right and be trusted. Seems like a simple thing, but oh man, it's not so simple in the real world, right?
Well, and we agree with 100% of what you just said, Tim. So much so that we have also supplier scorecards that are built into SourceDay. So we are constantly monitoring dates, capturing that data, and using that information to feed part of the supplier scorecard that's built into SourceDay. And we're doing that for 100% of the suppliers that are on the application. And of
Love it.
course providing that information to buyers so they can see exactly what's going on. And typically you've got the promise date and you have a due date field, and originally you start with a promise date field, a promise date that we both agree to, but then something happens. So we still keep record of the original date that was promised, but we still allow the due date to change because you actually do want real dates, and MRP wants real dates. So we do allow the due date to change, but we keep track of that original promise date, and that's what we use to be able to score those suppliers.
That makes sense. Yeah, you don't want to lose that. That makes sense. Okay, I have I don't want to get too derailed before we will get to talk about the portal. We got a few minutes left
Well,
here.
we've been talking
Uh,
about it this whole time. I've been tricking you. So
it's all getting stored centrally, right? Yeah, this is
yeah.
not like random emails. And that's the whole point, is that it's stored in a structured format. It's not just stored somehow
Well,
in
for
folders in
a
your email, right?
yeah, for a buyer user on SourceDay, they are using the portal, 100%. A supplier is optionality. They can do email or the portal or EDI, but buyers are using the portal.
How are you on time, by the way? Are you able to go a little bit past the
Yeah.
top of the hour, or do you have a hard stop?
I can keep going. Let's see. Let me make sure before I say that. Um, I do have a hard stop at, I guess, 2 o'clock my time. So yeah, eight
Okay,
minutes.
no problem. All right, no problem. So I do want to ask you something on the portal, but there was something else I wanted to ask. I just lost it. Give me a second here. Awkward silences are fine on this podcast. We have no problem with that. Um, we're talking about yes. So we're talking about vendor scorecards because you mentioned EDI earlier. Is what made me think of this. This might be, you might not want to respond to it because it's too big brother for some people. And
Hmm.
feel free to say no. But do you do any type of like centralized vendor tracking? In other words, you've got 5 different customers using your product, and to know EDI, you have to know like who the person really is on the other end. So you have 5 different customers, they all have different vendor IDs and maybe even type the name of the vendor a little bit differently. But do you have some kind of like master, I know who this vendor is and it's the same vendor across all of my customers, and I can actually score them across multiple customers' data rather than me just seeing how the vendor performs for me personally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you're going to make me use a safe harbor statement here. So we have today we don't have that. We call that in house like benchmarking, benchmarking your supplier against maybe what that same supplier is doing for other customers. We don't currently service that. It is something that we have been talking about doing for not only for supplier by supplier, but maybe just more, it could be industry benchmarking, or it could be part,
Right.
benchmarking.
Something
We
more
see,
aggregated, right? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but we don't do that
Okay, that's
today. But
cool.
it's something we're
Yeah, because
talking
then
about.
people would have to opt in. Yeah, it could get complicated, but that's the cool thing about capturing the data in one place. You can start to have those conversations. That is cool.
Exactly.
All right, so portal. I guess my first question is, I spent most of the time talking about email just because I'm a real world type of person. Do you know off the top of your head, or even if you do you feel comfortable sharing, seeing all this communication, again, having it all in a structured format is gigantic, right? Now you can actually get some really cool insights. Do you have an idea across your platform what percentage of individual people on the other end? So I don't mean like companies, that's the vendor, but there might be 5 buyers on the other end. Sorry, 5 people receiving POs on the other end. Do you have an idea of like what percentage of people are using the email versus actually logging into your portal? Is it more than 50% or less than 50%?
It's a great question. I don't know the exact answer to that. We have lots of portal users. The email functionality, the pure email functionality that we've been talking about, is something newer to us. It's something that we started doing this year. But we recognize that over time that's going to be, a lot of our users. But we just to give you a sense, I think the last number I saw was we had something like 20,000 actives, like 50, between, I think around 16, 17,000 active suppliers on SourceDay. And that's business entities, not like logins, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, that doesn't surprise me, I guess, given the level of marketing volume I see you guys push out like on social media
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
um,
We're active there.
what like, and then is it like a username and password? Is it basically just that to log in?
Yeah. So what we do is we sell to like a manufacturer. So the company that's running Acumatica is who we would sell SourceDay to, and then when we sign them up, that company might have 2 or 3 or 5 buyers, and so those buyers would be given login accounts to the portal, and then suppliers. We pull the supplier data right out of Acumatica. So one of the first things we do in our integration is pull the vendor table over. So because one of the first things we have to do is make sure that the customer has good vendor data in their vendor table. So we need to make sure we have all the vendor emails and where everything needs to go. And so we pull that data in. So those suppliers that would access the portal would do that with that email address and of course their name.
And then they would set up a password and go from
Exactly.
there.
Yep.
Okay. And
Yeah.
how do you price it then? Do you price it per buyer on your customer side, or do you actually have a component to how many suppliers are logging in? Is it transactional?
Yeah, so really good questions. It's more transactional, so we do look at the spend of an organization and try to size it that way, because not every customer is the same. But there's no charge for suppliers. So if a customer has 100 suppliers, or if they have 1,000 suppliers, there's no additional charge for that. And what we do find, just as an interesting little note, is most of the time a customer doesn't, when they have a supplier, they don't usually just have one person at that supplier that they want in SourceDay. They might have, 2 or 3 contacts. So if a customer says, okay, these 100 suppliers are who, I want to use SourceDay, it actually might end up being 200 to 300 people.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, you're not penalized for bringing people onto your platform.
Exactly.
Essentially.
Exactly.
Okay. And I like the transactional. Acumatica's priced similarly, and I like that.
Yes. Yes.
Well, very cool. We're hitting up against the top of the hour. I probably could have kept pestering you with questions for another half an hour or so, but sorry we spent maybe too long on the email. Be interesting to see. I didn't realize that was a newer feature. Be interesting to see where that adoption is at a couple years from now. I still wonder, just getting someone to create another password it can be a challenge, right? So I love that you have the ability to do it by email. That's the hard part. I get once they're in the portal, you can do all sorts of cool stuff, and I'm sure
Yeah.
you would have loved to spend most of the time talking about that, but I'm sure it's great. I
No,
love that
actually,
you
I'm
built out
glad
the
you
email.
asked me about these email stuff, because it's so we actually coined it unified supplier collaboration. So adding the email piece, adding the EDI to the portal to sort of round out our offering is really landing very well with customers, because you don't want to leave any suppliers behind, right? And sometimes
Right.
suppliers are just not good. If I'm cutting one PO to a supplier every year, that supplier might not invest into learning how to use SourceDay portal, but they'll certainly continue to work with you through email. So this allows sort of that tail supplier, those ones that wouldn't necessarily use a portal, to be a part of the experience. But most importantly is we're giving the buyer a single experience regardless of the supplier or how they want to collaborate.
I love it. Yeah, email marketing for purchasing is what it sounds like to me. I love it.
I'm going to let you say that. I'm not going to say that. Sarah Scudder would kill me. So.
No, that's what's cool about it to me. Wait, we've hit the top of the hour. Any last things that you wanted to mention that we didn't get to?
Well, just appreciate you being here. I'm not sure when this is going to go out, but we will be at Acumatica Summit this year. So, what I should have probably started with is we are the guys in green. And so, if you see the green coats or a green booth or whatever, that's us. And we'd love to talk to you at Acumatica Summit.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for coming on, Clint, and sharing about your product.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having us, Tim.
All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of ogforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening, and take care.